ladies and gentlemen. As Eric has rightfully said in his introduction to this particular segment, I think the office market is one of those segments that has gone through a whole evolution since the advent of COVID. We're still going through that evolution process. We're seeing a lot of changes, some of them which I think will be permanent changes, but it's one of those segments that has impacts all of us. I believe we all work in an office, so I'm hoping that this will probably be the most lively, engaging topic. I believe you all have been part of that evolution, and I'm sure you're seeing all these changes happening in your workplace. Just to introduce myself, so my name is Winnie, and I work in the Occupier Strategy Department within Knight Frank. To introduce Knight Frank, just briefly, we are a professional services firm, international professional services firm, established in 1998, so we just marked our 25-year anniversary, as you'll note that in our banner. And we advise national, international clients, developers, investors, owners, both in the commercial and residential segments, on a wide array of real estate needs, property management, commercial agency, residential agency, valuation, project management, facilities management, and research-led consultancy. So I'm joined today by a dynamic team of panelists, comprising developers, shared flex office operators, and two panelists who deal directly with occupiers. So they will have great insights on what's happening in that particular segment. I think one of the major changes that we're seeing now in the commercial space is a lot of development now is actually adjusting to occupier needs, rather than where previously landlords would actually build without the end user in mind. We're seeing a lot of developments coming up now, commercial developments now, that are actually led by what occupiers want. So I'm looking forward to a very useful engagement. Just to set the scene and just to conceptualize the whole topic, I just want to run through some of the changes that we have seen in the office market, starting with pre-pandemic and what the office was pre-pandemic. So the office was pretty much the center of productivity, culture retention, and very much the core of all office-related activities. There was a bit of rigidity in terms of adoption of technology, especially technology that allowed people to work remotely. And because of that, it justified the commute to work. So having to drive 2 hours to come to work was a justifiable commute because you couldn't work effectively remotely. There was stable macroeconomics, again, just before the pandemic. The companies were less sensitive to occupancy costs. Employee productivity was based on you being physically present. So if you're not in the office, the boss automatically assumed that you're not working. There was less emphasis on employee wellness. Things like even just a maternity or nursing room had to be enforced by the law. Here, like just speaking locally, that had to be passed or had to be enforced by legislation. And rents, especially in our market, the Kenyan market, were rising, but it was a steady rise. Then the pandemic hit, and all of a sudden, a lot of the changes that we had seen happening in the on the office market segment had to be accelerated. So we always say COVID actually accelerated the changes that happened within the office market. They were happening, they were going to happen over a period of time, but COVID just was a catalyst for all these changes. All of a sudden, employees had to work from home. That was not a choice, that was not an option. That was the only way companies could survive. There was immediate adoption of IT to support remote working, Teams, Skype, and all these technologies to support collaborative work while working remotely. Companies all of a sudden became sensitive to costs. Real estate costs translate to about 25% of company costs. So that was a huge factor with the advent of COVID. As the markets became more volatile, we saw some landlord incentives, although most of them in our markets were mostly confined in rent incentives and discounted rents. There was a sharp decline in our market. We saw about a 13% drop in the rents from $1.3 to about $1.12. There was a drop in absorption, and there was a drastic focus on wellness, in particular health and safety of employees, the quality of airspace, more green spaces, and ventilation, both mechanical and natural ventilation. So I'll not dwell too much or focus too much on the post-pandemic era, because I'd like that to be discussed at length by the panelists that we have on stage. But just to highlight some of the things, because I think the flight to service has been mentioned previously by the speakers in the earlier session. So this is one of the key trends that has emerged out of COVID, especially in the office market. There's a huge flight to service. Developers are reacting to it, so we're seeing a lot of the office spaces that are coming up now being grade A office spaces, and this is as a reaction to what the occupiers are demanding now in our market. Of course, there's the adoption of hybrid work style as a permanent. I think previously, it was seen as a temporary solution to COVID, but now I think it's becoming widely adopted by companies as a permanent work style. Repurposing of the office, rents are more stable now, and now we have growth of shared and flex offices, which my panelists will discuss at length. What the future looks like, I think I'll also leave that to the panelists as well to just highlight what that looks like. But I think from my perspective, I think more advances in technology, and I guess the other thing that has been highlighted as well is the focus on ESG, and I expect that these will continue being a focus or a key requirement both from occupiers, and I think developers will have to react to it in the products that they deliver. So just to briefly introduce the panel, have Lucy sitting right next to me. She is head of tenant rep, JLL, Moses, who is the head of Brawl in Uganda, Michael, CEO of Kofisi, Pumi, who works for Gateway Developments, and Khalil, who works for Casada Capital. So my first question will be to Lucy, and basically what I would like you to respond to is the question of what obviously you do a lot of tenant rep, and you get to interact with occupiers on a day-to-day to understand what their requirements are and how those requirements have changed since the advent of the pandemic. So please just highlight what these changes are.
Thank you, Winnie. Good afternoon, all. I think without repeating much of what Winnie has said, the fact that we're discussing offices is testament to the fact that offices are here to stay. Do they remain what they were pre-pandemic? Of course, I think many conversations from Estelle, Intel, what Winnie has said, shows that they will not, or they have not. I think we're discussing this at a reasonably good time, because it's 2 years post-pandemic, so what was going to happen has happened. And just to add on to what Winnie has talked about, the pre-pandemic phase, I'd like to just mention two things. A lot of the occupiers we acted for immediately pre-pandemic had shifted from our traditional offices that were cellular, private bathrooms in the CEO's office, and that kind of style, to what was the more open plan with collaborative spaces. So a lot of occupiers had more than, in a period of 5 years, almost doubled their office occupation requirements. That was also encouraged by the fact that with a lot of increased supply in Nairobi, offices were relatively cheap. So corporates could move from their 2,000 square feet to 4,000 to accommodate growing teams, to accommodate more luxurious offices. Then come the pandemic and everybody goes home. Companies then invested substantially some to the extent of investing in private offices in people's homes. So when you work from home, you're not only technologically enabled, but a lot of the tech farms or farms that have people who sit for long hours invested in good ergonomic seats and desks for their staff. So when people were due back, what do you do with what you invested in pre-pandemic and what you have? And we immediately started receiving requests to, could you renegotiate these leases now? Peculiar to Kenya and maybe not to the rest of our East Africa market, we have leases that are legislated in terms of term, and they also do not allow exits within the lease. So there's a bit of a tough period, landlords having to accept to negotiate that, and then we move to now what we have today, the post-pandemic, mostly negotiated leases. People who had leases that were coming to an end most probably exited or were able to negotiate to a different model. So the things, if I answer specifically to what Winnie has asked, what we are seeing is flexibility has become very key. Legislation hasn't changed, but because the market can't remain static, what we do a lot of, and which is actually one of the areas of our constant day-to-day engagement, is how do we build flexibility into a term of lease that legislation doesn't allow flexibility for. We have market practices that we're employing, and that's being achieved. We also have landlords that, in engaging with us, have come to realize, do I accept this market practice workaround, or do I stay rigid and lose this tenant when their date comes? So a lot of flexibility from landlords is encouraging that. What are they specifically looking for? Slightly reduced space, because people still are occupying largely what they did, just reshaped it. You've reduced a number of your touch points, maybe changed this to what is acceptable in the post-pandemic period, but retained reasonably adequate touch points. Because as much as we have substantial work from home practices, we still have companies that have come full circle to realize that for their culture, the culture of the organization, for their collaboration to be effective, there are certain days in your week that you have the full team in. So the office has reshaped, but it continues to be relevant. Reduced space, more amenities within the space. Are landlords providing this? Not necessarily, so some of this have had to be built into the tenant spaces. And essentially, the flexibility of it continues to be a pain point. We continue to use the workarounds that, but that has become a very key determinant of what people lease.
Thank you, Lucy. I think one of the things you've touched on is flexibility and the need for flexibility, which is, I think it's a language we continue to emphasize on when we speak to our landlords. We need to be flexible, and they need to be flexible for them to be able to retain tenants, and I think to get the buildings into a comfortable level of occupancy. The other thing that I think you've touched on, which is very important, and which is a question that I think we get so very often as players in this segment, is whether the function of the office is dead. And I think we keep saying, as you just to reiterate what you said, the office is not dead. I think the function of the office is what has probably evolved. It's probably now more a place to build social capital and probably a place for employees to network. But I think it's far from dead. And it will just continue, the function of it will just continue evolving. Moses, just because I think Lucy has talked from a Kenyan perspective, maybe you can highlight some of the changes that you're seeing in the Ugandan market. I know you don't have exactly you don't have tough legislations on leases as we do here. Commercial leases here are pretty much fixed to a 5-year plus lease. So I don't know if your leases are more flexible in that regard. And what are some of the changes that you're seeing in your market that are occupier-led? And how are your landlords reacting to that?
Thank you, Winnie. Everyone. Purely from a Ugandan perspective, I think these markets tend to pretty much work all together in the same way. If you look at things that are happening in Kenya in terms of demand from occupiers, traditionally, most of the companies that have been opening up shop in Kampala have set up shop first in Nairobi, then they've moved into Uganda, and that sort of expansion plan plays out in the larger aspects of their demand space requirements. But if you look at it from a legislation perspective, I think Uganda last year we passed the new Landlord-Tenant Act, and we deliberately made sure we don't have any tenant-controlled sort of tenancies to allow for that sort of flexibility. But going back to the demand and the changes, right now, most of the big bulk sort of demand is coming from oil and gas, and by nature of their sort of business and trying to commercialize the oil and gas industry in Uganda, we've noticed that these guys are looking for Class A buildings. It's not even about Grade A. And when you're looking at representing a big oil and gas sort of company that is coming to the market, the checklist that you need to take off in terms of the design quality of the building, floor heights, standards, are using British standards, parking requirements, energy efficiency, and all these sort of things. We come short in Kampala on that sort of quality. So we right now battling getting landlords to appreciate this sort of product and be able to, position themselves to tap into that, because I don't think we have more than 5 Grade A buildings in Kampala, and of those, probably 4 of them are fully occupied. So that creates a whole new dynamic, and that's the top end of the market. But if you look at the demand shifts from the, financial services, insurance companies, government parastatals. For the financial services, again, optimization, because people are trying to save costs. So everyone is saying, can you regear the lease? Can you look at ways I can, save on my real estate assets and things like that? So it's not any different from Nairobi. And that also, the other aspect to it is that they're now aspiring to go into Grade A buildings. So we're having a situation where the older stock Grade B, the vacancy levels are quite high, which is worrying, and it's the next level of things that we need to do in the market, try and see how do we retrofit maybe some of those older buildings to meet the requirements that we have right now. But increasingly, the big guys, they're looking at 10,000 square meters, 8,000 square meters. We're looking at new buildings from scratch because we don't have the sort of spec they're looking at. A couple of those in the pipeline, but there's a lot we need to do in terms of trying to meet their requirements. The smaller guys, the financial services guys, the SMEs are all looking at flexible, sort of solutions because they don't want to commit for the long haul. Uganda's economy is largely driven by SMEs, so most of the companies are startup. So rarely do you get a startup company to lock in a 5-year lease, 3-year lease, and that's where the next, level of intervention should come. The more flexi space we have, the better we'll service the wider market. Thank you.
Thank you, Moses. Just a follow-up question to just something you mentioned. You mentioned oil and gas companies in Uganda. Are those driving occupancies of office space in Uganda, in the Kampala market specifically, or is it generally Uganda?
Well, the biggest demand drivers right now from oil and gas, for very obvious reasons, because we're expecting the region of $20 billion to be invested in the next 5 years into our economy, just on the back of oil and gas. So all of them, the delays have been how quickly do you get experts in, get them approve the work permits, then get the offices and accommodation. So we're quite busy in that space. We could do better in terms of fast-tracking that, but the other bit of it is when they come into the market, they want space in 3 months, and it's not available. So that's why now the flexi office providers come in handy to provide the bridge sort of gap between when they get their desired location and what they need to do, the experts that are coming in.
Thank you, Moses. So I think my next question will be directed towards Pumi. I think from the developer standpoint, I think it's important for us to understand whether developers are reacting to the changing needs of the occupier and how they are reacting to it. I know Gateway have a couple of projects in Africa. I know you're involved in Tatu City, at Inyo. Have you made changes? Are there any changes that have been made in that design or in that particular development that is already in the pipeline to match what occupiers are looking for now, or the changing needs of occupiers now?
Hello? Okay. Thanks, Winnie, for that. Yeah, I think what we should remember is the demand for P-grade buildings is not a new thing. it was definitely pre-COVID. So are developers responding to it? Most definitely. What we have found, or what we all experienced, is that during the pandemic, it kind of disrupted that whole thought process, where certain regions were quite advanced with providing those, developers were quite advanced in providing those P-grade or A-grade buildings, like the regions of South Africa. Certain regions were just starting to get involved in those sort of asset classes and bringing that quality. And in response to the pandemic, what I'll tell you how we responded to it, but how I've seen the market respond to it from a developer's point of view, is that A-grade buildings were still delivered through the pandemic because they were already on the ground. And the encouragement for the developers is that the multinational tenants that had committed to occupy these buildings were still committed to follow through with the process and then occupy it. You see it with some of the stats that we see now in Kenya, or in the last couple of years in Kenya. Nairobi brought in about 60,000 square meters A-grade buildings last year. That's not something that started here recently. It's breaking ground 2-3 years prior to the pandemic. What then happened during the pandemic? What did we do during pandemic as Gateway? So firstly, we also delivered a 5-star green building in the Indian Ocean region, which is our head office called the Precinct. In response to that demand, we are the anchor tenants in that building. It's a 5-star grade building, and to rethink the occupancy of that, we also then collaborated with the Workshop 17, who provide co-working spaces, and we're all in the same precinct. So we managed to put a package together that gives the right amenity, high quality services, and finishes to be able to encourage the motion and the movement of us as developers to respond to the demand. What you see now, we are now currently in Kenya, and we are developing in Tatu City, as you've responded. And what the transition from our response to the pandemic to where we are now, we then, through the pipeline, thought, okay, well, how do we stop and rethink, how do we deliver the rest of our pipeline? Because it cannot be the same. The pandemic has showed us this. We have to respond more efficiently and more effectively to the environmental requirements. We have to respond more efficiently and effectively to the wellness requirements that occupiers want, because it's no longer, well, you know, you've got a very beautiful building and it's got great amenities, but how does it help our staff to want to come back, you know? And through that process, our then business strategy and business model kind of evolved into going into partnerships instead of being an isolated developer. And that's where you will see the like of us developing at Tatu City, our project called Ineo, where CCI is taking 60% of the building, which was purposely designed and developed for CCI. It's a mixed-use development, but what the thought process through that has now got us into really having close partnerships with the land developer, because we are not land developers, and saying, listen, we are here, we are ready, we've got a tenant that is ready to expand, because that's our business model. We develop for multinationals that want to expand within the region or in Africa. How can you come into this strategy for the longevity part of it? And we find ourselves, I mean, there's a lot more collaboration that we're doing with Tatu City, but you have a land developer that goes and has spends time at CCI's offices to understand, how does staff move in a call center? Is our infrastructure sufficient for Gateway's big development? And this is our new, we are kickstarting the CBD. If it doesn't work out now, how's it going to work out for the rest of the precinct? So to answer your question, yes, most definitely developers are responding, not just us. We've trying to find more unique ways to respond to it. Very much our relationship and partnerships with multi-tenant coming into the region specifically will want to come into Kenya, but it's not just about the one building that we're building in Tatu City. It's, well, then how do we support you to provide the A-grade buildings and amenities and the facilities that you need throughout your growth strategy. And that means we need to have the right type of partnerships, including landowners, including being in an area where the facilities and amenities will support our business strategy, because that's what we're marketing.
Oh, thank you. It's good to understand that and to actually know that these were already, the landlords were already reacting to this even before the pandemic. And I think, you'll continue reacting to that, and also hearing that, you're also, building, with tailored, or providing tailored solutions to tenants or occupiers who are looking for, because I would, like something like CCI, that's obviously a special kind of tenant. They're not the usual tenants. So I'm assuming even the cabling and the data, the usage of the space is quite different from your typical occupier. So it's good to understand that. Moving on to Michael, and just to understand what's happening within the shared office space. Obviously, this is a sector that has evolved and seem to be the winners out of out of the need for flex, I guess, and out of the need for for flex actually in this industry. So you're a CEO of Kofisi, and I know you've been the pioneer shared flex providers in this market for a while. And you've also introduced the hotelification of the workplace, and this has been a concept that you have been key in delivering as a service. So tell us how this has evolved. Has there been a greater need for a hotelification service of the office space, and how are you responding to this?
Yes, great, and I love the energy of your answer, and hopefully I can keep that going, because I think the conversation about partnership is so important. We're an operator, so we live in this building that you transact every day after the transaction's done, and that's a big part of the change, I think. We've always had a vision at Kofisi that standards needed to rise, the design should be amazing, the service should match that vision. And what we're seeing from clients from our side is just a demand for more. They want more space, they want more amenities, they want more service. And we've applied ourselves in that format to larger scale spaces now. Our centers are typically 60,000 square feet, about 6,000 square meters for those that operate on that metric. And what we've done, though, is we've noted that as we got bigger, that we started to see more and more similarity, both in terms of the physical mirroring to a hotel, because a lot of the spaces that you're providing are very similar to the amenities you'll enjoy while you're at this very convention, or if you're staying here at the Radisson. Receptions, event spaces, F&B, lounges, et cetera, et cetera. But what we also found there was a similarity with the service line. And when we talk about service, we're talking about hospitality. And we think there's a huge correlation between hospitality as an idea and productivity for a company. And given the fact that you're going to spend 90,000 hours of your life inside a workspace, why can't it just be as amazing as that night that you had in the hotel when you stayed there? You're going to be there the whole time. So let's pursue that. And we saw hospitality as a very important theme. And it's also the bridge step between the physical space, the transactional scenario, and it's a triangulation really between that and the user and the facilities that are going on. And we live in the middle of that. So, we're really excited about this area. And I love talking about this because, for me, the essence of it is that when you consider service at work, well, that's just making sure that the lights are on in your space. But when you consider hospitality, well, that's a space that can help you shine light on your work. Okay, and that's the difference. It's an emotional feeling that the user's going to have. And our biggest part of our why is to help companies support the user, which is the staff members, which is the average everyday person who's coming to work the whole time. It's a holistic narrative between our hosts and our members so that we can be responsive, dynamic, and understand everything they need, from the simplest thing of a coffee being delivered to a more complex event occurring, so that they can go through their constant cycle of productivity to collide, decide, dedicate, celebrate, whatever stage you're at. And I think it's the delivery and the care and attention that comes with that, which makes our members understand that we're on their side. And that means they have a great day at work, okay? And then that means that they're not worrying about the wrong things, they're worrying about the right things, and they can shine brightly, and they can have their own light bulb moment. So, you know, hospitality, I think, is going to play a huge role in the changing way that the workspace is going to operate. The role of the desk has changed massively. And I would say this because I'm pitching, I suppose, but, you know, I don't see that that's ever going to go into reverse, you know. I think there's too much awareness of, we've tasted too much of the nectar. And we were thinking this prior to COVID. COVID, you know, the pandemic, it was an amplification of persuasion, if you will. It was the right move, it's the right idea, and we've been doing that for the last 4 to 5 years. And we think that there's a healthy future ahead for this industry and this sector.
Thank you, Michael. So you think that's actually the solution to getting employees back in the office? Great. Just moving on to Khalil, who is pretty much staying within the same theme. Khalil, I know you are in the process of launching your product here in Nairobi, Wojo, which is our work-spitality product, just within the shared service space. Could you kindly explain more about the product and just basically what gap it addresses, or basically what's that niche offering that you're going to provide within the market?
All right, thanks. Good afternoon, and thanks for having me today. Well, before describing the product, I think when I hear what I'm hearing, with the need of flexibility, I think like landlords should be more open and creative and welcome more co-working in their empty square meter. And I also believe that companies, they should let us take care of their office while they focus on their core business. I really think that it's a key thing. So at Casada, we primarily, let's say, invest in hospitality in hotels. So we have now 17 hotels across the continent. And basically, and more to come, hopefully. Basically, while we do deals around hotels, the asset management team also look at how we can create more value and what could be the key value drivers. And in practice, we are talking how you generate more incomes and more revenue from your square meter. We look at our assets and we see a lot of empty square meter, empty space. Co-working is a fantastic opportunity for us, actually. So that's, Michael talked about hotelification of offices, and it's exactly complementary to what he's trying to do. We try to bring work and living, let's say, space in the same ecosystem, the hotel ecosystem, basically. Accor operates our hotels, as you may know, and while they focus operating the hotel system and rooms and F&B, we in Casada decided actually to sign an agreement with a well-known co-working brand in Europe called Wojo. That's actually part of the Accor brand too. And we decided to take the lead because we see a lot of value in that. Building the hotel ecosystem and actually integrating an office product in a hotel ecosystem, it's key, and we are very excited to see the first pilot coming in Nairobi, and we are also very excited to start in Nairobi because we really believe that this city needs this kind of product. The work-spitality, again, it's trademarked by Wojo and Accor, but feel free to use it. It's working and hospitality. So it's how you inject hospitality expertise in an office product, and how you offer an office product to your hotel customers, basically. And the level of cross-selling and revenue diversification we expect from this ecosystem, I hope will validate our investment thesis. We're starting with Nairobi, but we are moving also Pan-African. We'll be also in the usual suspect cities, I would say, in the continent, from west to east and south. But yeah, the idea is how to retain as much as we can our customers within that ecosystem, and how we can offering them, food and beverage, a gym, a swimming pool. You want to do an event, you can use the co-working space, you can use the hotel space. That's how it works. Accor is also operating that space for us, and actually that's a very interesting moment and junction between hospitality and co-working. We, as Casada, will bring, let's say, the advice and expertise around co-working, but Accor will have to manage it, and they are a hospitality player. And we are really, 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 really excited about the success story that actually is already ongoing with our general management in Upper Hill Mercure. So that's an exciting time, and I think the ecosystem deserves this kind of product. There is nothing actually new in what we are trying to do. We are just first mover and bold and saying, let's invest, let's create a product, an office product within the hotel, and let's see how all these complementarities will happen and materialize.
Thank you. I guess maybe that's probably the next step from what has traditionally been offered in the market, because I think we've not seen a lot of fusion, especially between the hospitality sector, or even having hotel brands operating and co-working space. So interesting to see how that evolves and how you actually how that plays out in our market. Just moving on to Lucy, I think what I'm hearing, the message that is coming across from the other end of the panel is that a shell and core delivery by landlords just won't be enough. Is this a demand that you're seeing from occupiers? Do they now expect more than just a shell and core space, even if it's not within a co-working space? Is this a trend that you're seeing now?
Definitely. Definitely. It's in the sense that as much as there's, of course, there's a place for demand for spaces such as what Kofisi or Wojo will offer, but there's a traditional office space that is still, there's certain corporates, either by their way of working or regulation or just the cultural component of the company does not allow them to go to co-working spaces or to shared spaces. So that forces them to remain in traditional lease setups. But as a consequence of what the shared service office spaces are offering, we are seeing tenants begin to demand that landlords become more competitive. What do I mean by that? So for instance, if you come to our traditional setup of Shell & Co., tenants are forced to fit in their own spaces a lot of the components that tenants or that companies want to offer their staff. The mother's room you talked about, the wellness or quiet rooms, tenants are forced to fit this in their spaces. So landlords must step up and offer those either alongside the core services that they offer in a building or offer them in certain points of a building that they stop becoming a tenant's investment. Tenants are also demanding, a few years back when we looked at spaces for tenants, the three key things we looked at is proximity to amenities. Now tenants are demanding that these amenities be within the space. We don't want to see a setup where you're mapping spaces to 5 kilometers to my shopping neighborhood, 3 kilometers to your nearest restaurants, 2 kilometers to a gym. A lot of these that are used to be nice to haves now are being considered must-haves. So there's 3 or 4 ways that landlords must step up to meet this. 1, change the shape of their offering. It may remain Shell and core, but what of these amenities do they offer in the building to complement the tenant's own fit-out? And that need not be just the basic legislated items of washrooms for the disabled and mother's rooms. Extend this to other softer services that tenants demand. It would be good to borrow from what the Kofisis and Wojos offer in a landlord's other additional services. There's also the expectation that just labeling a building grade A is enough. Tenants are now beginning to probe a little more. What does this grade A mean? Does it offer me efficient space? What does it offer in addition to, I think that those of us in the room who are landlords, brokers, we're used to defining grade A as, it's grade A, it's new, it's got generators, it's got a parking ratio of 3 to 1,000. That's no longer sufficient, and it's not even bare minimum. It needs to extend to, does it offer cycling racks for those who might want to cycle to work? Does it offer bathrooms for those who will have worked out on their way to work? What else does it offer over and above those basic ones? And then, of course, the flexibility we talked about. Landlords have to think outside the box in terms of the legislation says this. The lawyers in the room are advising their landlords every day on, well, this is what the law says. What else could you do that is different? Because one of the ways that even someone who's regulated to remain in personal space is forced to look at the co-shared offices is because they're able to get a flexible term of lease. If they can get away from that, their first preference may be a traditional office, but that traditional office has to shift from shell and core. Maybe I think the last item I could add is this market hasn't taken up to capital contributions by landlords to fit out. It's something the landlords must seriously consider, because while a tenant may want to fit out their space to their own spec and to their own style, what could a landlord offer over and above what has traditionally been? Maybe to keep your Covenant A tenant, the landlord has gone to maybe a year's rent-free for fit out, and they consider that over and above. I think we need to shift to what do we contribute as a landlord to the fit out in your space to make it more attractive. And I think those are some of the key ones that we are seeing tenants demanding. And it is driven by when you offer that fitted space that's offered by because the enterprise solution, I think, may offer a halfway house of the tenant who wants their bespoke space, but done by somebody else. But because of regulation for some entities, that then doesn't become a solution. So we are saying landlords meet tenants halfway. It is in a space that they've leased in a traditional sense, but what have they contributed to make it fitted for the tenant?
Just to keep the momentum on that, I mean, the co-working industry exactly came with the enterprise solution on the table, and there is no serious co-working player that doesn't have a design team that could be part of the product team, actually. So the landlord, they also have to come to the table and look those investments that have been done by the co-working players to have their own design and be able to play around those regulations. But in the end, the decision remains with the landlord to take a lease or not with the co-working guys. But the co-working players, the enterprise solution is not only like a PR or just a word in like that. It's real. We have like a co-working player. We'll have a team looking at that deeply, and I think they need also help from the industry to be seen as a solution provider, and not only a desk and a Wi-Fi. We are far from this now. And any co-working player that remains on, well, I'm giving you a desk and a Wi-Fi for X dollar or Kenyan shilling per month, will not survive this market. I truly believe this. We are going to product and enterprise solution.
I think it slightly speaks also to another point about the sector, which is, I mean, co-working's got a very low barrier to entry. It has a very high barrier to scale. You know, when we talk about enterprise solutions, we're not talking just about a four-man office. We're talking 100, 200 people spaces that are fully customized. But I think, as we're saying here, it's not just about delivering the space. It's about what happens subsequent. That's, I think, the fundamental difference with an enterprise solution. And if landlords are going to come downstream, they have to work with an operator to bridge the distance, because, quite frankly, that's a lot more work. You know, well, you go right back to that point about it being transactional. The building goes up, it's long let, right? And just providing some CapEx support to an enterprise client on a long lease isn't necessarily going to give the improved user experience. We insist in buildings that we're in that we're involved in the full ecosystem, because we believe that everything from the back of house to front of house has to run in the same tempo to ensure that experience is the same, as we said, like with a hotel. So although I agree, yeah, I mean, co-workers can provide design, I think it's important that we understand that the thinking and the science behind that design is actually where the real magic is.
I think we did mention, I think, I don't know whether it was my opening remarks about landlords building based on occupier demands. And basically, as much as, you're a landlord, and to some extent, you're also an occupier. So basically, your views, your input into that design process is actually very key in delivering a product that is actually sellable. So I think we're out of time, so I'll just open up questions. Oh, okay, you already have two.
Afternoon, guys. My name is Trevor, CEO, co-founder of Alpha Block. And at Alpha Block, we're enabling investors to buy shares on tokens of income-generating real estate. And from the customer conversations I've been having, no one really understands the difference between co-working space from four-man, four-woman desk or 100 people, one floor type of service. So what are we talking about in this case? Maybe my question is to Michael and Khalil, tapping into your experience in co-working spaces. What are we saying is the gap and the highest opportunity? Is it servicing for these multinationals where someone's paying a 5-10-year lease, bringing in 50 of their employees, or are we building something for the startup ecosystem? When I say startup, I mean pre-seed, seed stage kind of companies that are bringing in their 10, 20 people into the office space.
Okay, so it's a great question. We talk about shared workspace as which is a broad church and goes from co-working to enterprise flex. Co-working sometimes becomes a euphemism at the top, but co-working is very much about individuals craving connectivity. And as you work your way up the hierarchy of needs, in sort of Maslow terms, you end up at sort of cultural support requirements of a company. At this end, at enterprise solutions, this is very much an outsourcing play. This is about long-term contracts, providing a better service for a cheaper cost. But it's highly complex because as the bigger the company gets, the bigger the contract gets, but the more divisions, the more stakeholders are involved. And that requires considerable time and energy. The gestation period is very long. At the other end, you have the co-worker who's the individual who's paying you monthly. He's probably paying, just to put some numbers on it, a co-working desk could be $150 a month, whereas a 100-man business is paying you $500 per member per month for 3 years. So there's a huge difference. This end is a lot easier to break into because you really just have an angle on space, open up, have a name, and you can start, right? But the longevity of the client here is very different. The ecosystem is very different, and you have to paddle very hard to maintain that client because they can move around. I think what we've been talking about here is there is a connection between the two because the big companies want to be around the cool kids, and the cool kids want to aspire to be the companies. So it does make sense to have them in the same spaces. But I think in terms of the real estate journey, the thing that scares the landlord, and forgive me, I think is the co-working end because that's unreliable. What we have to do is to shape the market to help owners and developers, people in the room here, to understand that the enterprise solution that we've been talking about, right, is actually a genuine opportunity, and that landlords shouldn't be scared of those partnerships because those businesses, those operators are trading the same thing that they are, right? And we can bring all kinds of solutions to the bigger ecosystem that will, even if you're not the whole building, will create tenant tow for other major clients to come in and take traditional leases, because they'll always be traditional, right? But in terms of growth in Africa, less than 0.5% of commercial workspace is shared workspace at the moment. If you look at global markets, London, New York, LA, Berlin, Singapore, it's like 12 to 15%. So that means like if a building goes up now, anyone's got a building going up here of 10 stories, 2 floors of that should be shared workspace, just to be on message with the market. So it's a huge growth area, but hopefully that answers your questions. One end is a little more resilient than the other, but it's a bit more complicated to jump into.
Just to add on that, I think on the community side, co-working proved that they can build communities by connecting those enterprises to the startups. You can even choose a team and do events, and it's fine. I think the enterprise solution it's very key for a co-working or flex office solution because it brings you the scale to have an efficient back office and have an OPEX running properly and a facilities management that actually will serve that startup also. So I would say it's a healthy ecosystem, and you need basically anchor tenants to come and to the game actually, because that will make your operation lean, disciplined, and efficient, right? So because when you serve, and Michael knows that, when you serve a Google or an Amazon, just to name them, you have to match those standards, and those standards will be open to the local startup that is trying to do their business. So we are partners.
Sorry, yeah, one last question. My name's Rob Woofenden. I'm a director with FBW Architects and Engineers. I'm going to finish with a very dull question, I'm afraid, about viability of office space. One of the problems our clients have with developing in Nairobi specifically is the parking requirement, which is 5 spaces per 200 square meters, which is, just to put it into perspective, Kigali, for instance, is one parking space. And because of the car culture in Nairobi, it has been required historically. I'm seeing a change certainly in accommodation. Our apartment block I live in is 100% occupied, with 50% of the parking spaces used and a steady stream of Ubers. And I think the Ubers or Bolt, whatever, have definitely changed the way that accommodation works. Will it also work with offices and take a bit of pressure off the fact that if you build an 8-story building, you need 7 stories of parking, which either means you're 2 years digging into the ground or you end up with Dunhill Towers, basically, yeah. Okay, thanks.
I mean, welcome to the hotel world. I mean, we have three floors of parking. I'm joking, but yeah, the competitive advantage of being in this kind of ecosystem is that, yeah, we don't need to think about these things. I know in the previous life when I was doing a co-working in another building, parking was a big issue. How you find it? We had to find some concierge, some people, some third-party services that will park the cars elsewhere in the area. It was a nightmare. I have to say that being in a hotel and having this office product within the hotel is just, we accommodate more than 150 to 200 people per day in that place, and we have enough parking. So it's a competitive advantage for, and if the co-working player can solve this, I don't know if we will start investing in parkings. For sure, you will unlock a lot of value there. But this is not anymore my problem. I'm happy.
If I can maybe add to that, sorry, I know we're out of time. That clock should just give me
Keep it going, keep it going. Go on.
But parking has always been an issue for a very long time in any region that you go into. And I think now the shift with moving into class buildings like A-grade and premium grade buildings is the promotion of work-life, social wellness, co-living spaces. And you have seen most developments that are going into the A-grade building passing building plans with minimum or less than required parking requirements, but that is also in collaboration with, well, what are the other amenities around that, to promote either more sufficient public transporting, to promote more working close from home, which means you can cycle into home, you can walk into home, into workspace and all of that. And I think that's where the opportunity, and we won't ignore the fact that the office space in Nairobi is saturated, there is an oversupply. But we cannot ignore that there is a demand for premium grade buildings, and that comes with the wellness element of it.
At the risk of Latif throwing us off the floor, I think I'll add that maybe to your point, there still remains a regulatory requirement for the ratio of parking. But in terms of occupier demand, as they're seeking offices now, we're seeing less and less uptake. So most of the occupiers for who we seek space used to almost always want higher than their entitlement. It's now gone the reverse. So you'll have somebody expecting, say, 2,000 square meters of office space, and as opposed to asking for 2,000 times 4 of that for their parking, they ask you for 10 and ask you, does that building have sufficient visitors parking? Does it have sufficient Uber drop-offs? So the parking conversation is definitely going to change, and maybe it's going to come from the building plan applications or from conversations with the regulators. But from the occupier perspective, it's definitely less.
Thank you, panelists. I think just to wrap it up, so literally with Verna. I think when the occupier needs have changed. Let me just want to wrap it up. The occupier needs have changed. Landlords are reacting. And in the meantime, we have the flex operators who are providing the bridge between where the occupiers are and where we expect the landlords to be. That's it.
Well done, well done.